long agreement, not fully thought through or exposed yet, but there are some points that have raised concern already. We talked earlier today with the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, and asked him to make the case on some of these disputed points. I want to show them to you, get you to respond. The first one is this issue of, will there be enough access to look at nuclear sites in the supply chain to determine whether Iran's in violation?
Sure.
The deal has 24/7 access to the declared nuclear sites, and the entire nuclear supply chain is covered in the inspections regime, from the raw materials to the centrifuge production to the conversion facilities. So they'd have to have an entire covert supply chain if they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon, not just one site. Then the deal allows for, and this is permanent, the IAEA to see what it wants to see when it needs to see it. So if we have suspicions about a site inside of Iran, we can go to the IAEA with that information and say we want an inspection. And here's the thing. If Iran objects to that inspection, if they say, no, you can't see that, we can overrule them if we and our European allies demand that inspection. And that will take place on a timely basis.
Inspections are obviously at the heart of any deal like this. Is the Deputy National Security Advisor, as far as you know, factually correct? And if so, does that come for you?
It doesn't look correct to me, and perhaps that's just glossing over the agreement. But the agreement contemplates a very arcane process of 14 days. Iran has the right to challenge a mediation dispute resolution system, and 5 votes at the P5+1, which means including Russia and China, to overrule Iran's objections. Iran has the right to challenge and stop, and it's not 24/7 access. So I think there's a provision there that is different than as presented by Ben, who's a professional, and we look forward to the administration's explanation of this. Maybe there is a better explanation, but the plain language so far definitely raises concerns.
Mark, second question. If Iran cheats or stonewalls, will the U.S. be able to reassemble the international sanctions regime with support from Russia, China, and Europe?
I think there's some real concern about that. When you look at the mechanisms even to inspect, which is arcane, 14 days, notice, going back to the P5+1, that explicitly means that you need the support of Russia and China, 2 of the biggest potential trading partners with Iran. So I think it almost injects it back into a UN-like process to reassemble some of the architecture of the pre-framework agreement.
But is that sort of thing possible? I mean, this framework came together because it was supposed to be a prelude to a diplomatic agreement. Now, if that falls apart, either because of cheating or stonewalling, how difficult is it going to be to get those powers to kind of come in again and say, okay, we're going to start over from the beginning? Maybe the U.S., maybe the U.S. Congress would be willing to do that, but how hard is it going to be to get like a Russia or a China to say, hey, we're with you and we'll go back to square one?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of snapback sanctions was the parlance.
Yeah.
As a former diplomat at the UN, I will tell you nothing snaps back and snaps back quickly. So I think I'm a little skeptical about that. But the reality is that we're in a different world right now. We're at $50 a barrel oil, and even when oil was $110 a barrel with mostly U.S.-dominated sanctions, the Iranian currency was devalued to the tune of 70 to 80%. So even with American sanctions alone and a $50 a barrel oil price, that could put the Iranian economy under great stress, and I think Iran should be very cautious that the United States alone, hopefully not, could impose sanctions back on Iran.
So one thing we, again, talked to Ben Rhodes about was this issue of Iran's going to have access to more currency now, and how will they use that money? Might they use it in ways that will be so deleterious to American interests that it's not worth doing the deal? Listen to what he said.
We expect that they will continue to undertake activity like support for terrorism proxies that we have very strong objections to. The point is, that would be far more dangerous if they had a nuclear weapon. They're going to get relief from the nuclear-related sanctions. But let's remember that those sanctions were put in place to achieve this deal. That's why the world cooperated with us. At the same time, we think that they're far more likely to invest the resources they get in their economy, which is in terrible disrepair, has huge government debts that they have to pay down.
So 2 points here. He concedes that Iran's going to have more money, but he says, A, this is worth getting them to not have nukes is worth it, and B, the administration believes that the money is going to be spent more on the economy rather than making mischief around the world.
Well, if history is any precedent, Iran has been engaged in massive empire building and proxy wars throughout the Middle East. Without this money and in an economy in peril, I think that they will be much more able to empire build and fight their enemies, their perceived and real enemies, with this money in hand. And look, Iran and its leadership has always been willing to sacrifice its own economy for its hegemonic ambitions in the region. Just ask the Iranian people in 2009 when tens of thousands poured into the street. They were always ready to let their people suffer first, suffer second, empire build first.
So do you think that this is a substantial downside as you look at the deal?
Of course. Anytime you give $150 billion minimum, and then all the revenue that's generated by the influx of business as sanctions are relieved, it will embolden a regime that's already emboldened in the region. And it doesn't take that much money to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, and otherwise. And I think we'd all be naive to think that none of that money will benefit their hegemonic ambitions.
But could this be a practical necessity? I mean, you're going to have a Hezbollah either way. Under this deal, you won't have them under an Iranian nuclear umbrella.
Well, I will tell you that one of the early supporters of the deal is Bashar al-Assad, who came out and said it was a victory, which means that he's expecting, presumably, Iran to be stronger and more capable of supporting him in the region. So I think that that's problematic. We shouldn't delude ourselves. The agreement is absolutely worthy of our close scrutiny, but let's be serious. If Iran is receiving a huge injection of financial wherewithal, we know what it's doing.
You're saying close scrutiny, and you're a measured and reasonable guy, a former diplomat.
Mark, thank you.
Your Republican presidential candidates, including your friend Jeb Bush, have been extraordinarily negative, and some characterizing this as like one of the worst things the United States has ever done. Is it possible that those who want to defeat the deal can get enough votes to override a presidential veto? Is that possible?
You know, I think when you put some polling up on your screen before, I think it is possible. I think that we need to vet the deal. Look, it's the most important consequential agreement, if you will, since the end of the Cold War. This is a day of sweeping rhetoric on both sides with a lot of hyperbole. Now we're going to get into the brass tacks, into the actual terms of this agreement over 60 days, and it will be very well litigated. I think you'll see the American people be able to weigh in. And I think that the reality is that it's going to force people on both sides of the aisle to deal with leadership rather than party fealty and rhetoric. We're going to know what these terms mean in precise mechanism, and I think the American people are going to be educated.